I'm going to talk a little bit about the series because you've got two more coming tonight. Two more. And I'll talk about them very briefly. I'm going to talk about what I consider a special relationship with Africa/South Africa. Having only been on the continent once prior to now, and that was in Kenya and as a tourist, so what did I really get out of the culture? A bit, because we latched on to somebody and he took us all over the place, which was absolutely marvelous, but that's not my backstory. The opportunity as part of our partnership, meaning with the college and with my institute, which is a formal, well, it's a memorandum of understanding, which is an agreement. It's not a contract. And so from that flowed this wonderful invitation to come. Putting the first two together, so putting the series and the special relationship with Africa and African music, thus specifically Dizu in this case, I'll talk about that. Then you already know quite a bit about the original samples and how that went, but I'll top it up a little bit. How I came to creating what I call a storyboard, since that's a term we all kind of know from, films and stuff. So you've got an idea. That's the first step towards structuring a work for me. Focusing on Dizu, his techniques, the bows he played on, and so on and so forth. You can read that. And the whole thing about the theme, old and new, and the attitude towards the samples, respect. That was talk number one when that came up. That was yesterday, man. It feels like a month ago, talk number one. But that's when I introduced it to you. I'll discuss briefly some details, including the rehearsal process, and then I'm going to say thank you in a very profound way. So there we go. So I talked about the old and new series at the end of talk number 3 yesterday, just before the concert. But I'll give you a couple hints about what's coming up tonight. It's in the program, but just you remember the Chinese piece, and I was taking a calculated risk because I thought some of the audience might find that music a bit too exotic and not want to be there for whatever it is, 13 minutes, whatever its duration is. And the number of people, including Tabisa, who plays with Dizu, who came up to me and said I was mesmerized, and there were certain sounds, and then they got into detail, and that meant like, this is sincere, because they're not talking about I had a good time, but that was special, that was special. I just went, oh, I'm so glad I chose that. Because, I mean, their musical culture is so different. And some of their old chamber music is, for lack of a better word, a bit kitsch. And others are really weird, and you get to the Beijing opera with those crazy vocal things that I just left till the end. And of course, then my tricks of the trade, where I started freezing instruments and space and time, and you got standing waves and all of that. What's an African audience going to think about that? I mean, you who are studying, or you who are specialists, that's a little bit different, because you're waiting to be confronted with something you haven't heard before, or heard in that way before, whatever. I wasn't so sure. The two you're getting tonight is a piece that was made very recently, and in a very short period, invited by a French percussionist who finds himself in East Asia a lot. So he's become quite virtuoso in East Asian instruments and East Asian performance techniques, and he's invited by East Asian composers to come across and play their pieces, which I find shocking, because why not your own? But fine, if they think he's the best person for the job. I've worked with him, and I've seen how much rehearsal time he put into that particular piece, and I don't get it. He's really good, but he takes too much on, as so many of us do. And I made for that piece, as for the Shun piece, which I showed you a video of, and Dizu's piece, a fixed version for when they can't perform. And I'm really glad in the case of this piece that you're going to hear tonight, that you're going to hear the fixed version. Because when he performed that piece at the festival for which he commissioned it, he wasn't on form. He just got locked and just did something, and he wasn't playing timbres that fit in the thing. And so I don't show the video of that terribly often, because I think he missed the mark. I'm sure when he plays it in the future, if he does, he'll give it more consideration. But that's the old not enough rehearsal time syndrome that we talked about before. So that piece, I had no idea what it was going to sound like because the preparation time was so slow. So I got these very nice recordings of Chinese cymbals and Tibetan bowls. And I just started the piece and I got inspired from the very first sound. And you'll understand why when you hear it tonight. It's very, very different from the two you heard yesterday. The last piece on the concert is called A Pluribus Plures. So that doesn't say old and new, whereas this one is Ching plus Cha, old and new. That's the symbol and the bowl. Is not orally, but dramaturgically a political piece. Because I'm mixing world music, but never playing at the same time, which I could do, and it could work. But just like I didn't play different bows at the same time yesterday, because I didn't think that was going to have added value. I didn't do the music at the same time. I had them overlap, so it's a segue, like radio production, where you go from one piece to the next, but there's no break. Because I wanted to celebrate the richness of each individual type of music, of each individual reason, of each individual type of people with their beliefs, their spiritual situation, their histories, their difficulties, whatever. A pluribus plures, out of many there are many, because we have so many cultures in this world. A lot of them were wiped out, like, the Irish language might not last long, the Gaelic may not last long, Welsh may not last long. That would be really awful. But the China, the Han Chinese trying to tell the Mongolians they can't speak their language in schools. And if South African education said no more Afrikaans schools and no more Xhosa schools and no more KwaZulu schools and so on and so forth, that would be a tragedy. And this idea of distilling things down into a particular model, I don't like. And I equally don't like, and you're going to hear this Irish radio piece tonight, that's laden with politics because Northern Ireland is in Britain and the Republic of Ireland is an independent country, and the tensions which really come back to Protestants and Catholics not liking each other, which was, if I remember, about 4 centuries ago that problem started. What in hell are people believing in the same Jesus Christ having such battles about? And they should just respect each other's situation and get on with it. So this piece is about the richness of the diversity of culture. Why can't we appreciate them for what they are, even though they're not ours? Perhaps even enjoy or adore them, and let them coexist and grow as they should, without the intervention of all of this hatred. Election in Germany last night being a very good example, and all these other tensions. Enough on that. This is not what this talk is about. So, old and new. Jesus inaugural, as I said yesterday, he talked about old and new, so he's aware of the fact, wants to keep this alive, feels that that's his life obligation to keep it alive, but knows it's dynamic and to try to adjust to today's and tomorrow's circumstances. He's on it, and that's what that whole series is about. When we discussed that in the studio, we knew this was going to work. So my special relationship with Africa, I've told you enough about it, so you're going to be pleased that you're not going to hear me talking in this talk much more. I studied African music. I love the West Coast for the drumming, and not just Ghana, but Nigeria, Guinea, all that. As I told the gentleman who's in residence, whose name is not on my head, you've got a master kora player in residence here right now. The first time I saw kora live was at the Autumn Festival in Paris with the most magical musician on the planet, and a choir of women, and they were so in tune. It was the most beautiful concert I'd ever heard. I have no other words, and that was it. So I studied music from the whole entire continent, and had those records I was talking about that I put on the tape. So that's basically how I learned stuff. And to this day, people ask me, well, what do you listen to most? Thinking I'm going to say Schoenberg or something like that. No. Bulgarian women in the Rhodope Mountains singing in parallel seconds? Yes. Orthodox chant from Georgia, the country, mainly male. Those harmonies, if you've never heard them, listen to it. You won't believe it. Music from this continent, every day, all day, if I had the chance, because I'd get my calories burned if I did it, And I had a chance to go to Ghana. I met two musicians, a master drummer who was actually based in Berlin, and a musicologist, Professor Nkatia, who was world famous, and boy, what an honor to meet that guy. And somebody who was a Lobi, so North Ghana, but at the University of Ghana with a balafon player, Kakraba Lobi. And he took me on as a student, said, if you come to Africa, I've heard you, if you come to Africa, you have to stay a year. Oh, okay, I'll have to leave my university for a year? Sure, they let me. Because you're not African, and you can't keep a beat. So we need 6 months to get you there. Then you can start drumming. I loved it. I was put in my place, but not only that, there was a Maltese percussionist, and he said the same thing to him. So this was a drummer who couldn't keep a beat. Okay, so I didn't feel so badly at least. That's how engaged I was, but it didn't happen because I didn't get a year. And, lost opportunity, but I guess I've done a few things in the interim, so it's okay. I wanted to celebrate our partnership somehow by not only bringing the two institutions together. I hope one day, like with these two gentlemen and Denise, that there'll be student exchange. The German government's a bit richer than the British one, so it's a bit harder for me to organize, but it will happen somehow. But I also think that these exchanges should involve cultural exchange. And so I thought this was the ideal way in of shaking hands. And in the end, it was a big cuddle with Dizu last night. And I felt his warmth, and he felt mine. And his son told me he'd been talking about me in this piece all week. What an honor. So I'm just going to leave that at that. So I think putting the series together with this relationship with Africa within the realm of the this old and new concept, that was a good dramaturgy. And the thing I needed to learn was, what did he want to do? Which bows would he want to play? How can we collect source material? How can I learn enough to know that whatever I do is not going to show disrespect? That's a double negative, but I need it in this case. No disrespect. And make something in which he doesn't get drowned out by 8 channels of sound, because that was a big, big threat. And you heard, the more he improvised, the more he was leading it. When he was sinking in the bottom, as in the beginning of the piece, which is intentional, because you see him crawling up and taking over my piece. At least that was my hope. So we had those samples that Theo really kindly sent to me, and I just relearned everything about the bow and how diverse they were. But the Chizambe, the rubbed one, I'd never heard in my life. And when I heard the recording, I heard electronic music played by a musical bow that was acoustic. And by the way, do you remember there was a drone in that sequence? Did anybody hear the drone? That must have been feedback in the studio. I didn't do it. The piece didn't do it. It was on the recording that was sent to me. And I said, well, if that was a coincidence, it's staying. Because some electronic drone snuck into this piece that's purely acoustic, that fits so elegantly, that just took my world, and I didn't even produce it. He did. So yeah, I really love that. So Uhadi, Umhrube, Lugube, that was the order they came in. Uhadi came back once. He didn't sing the first time, sang the second time. Chizambe taking it all the way out there. And the Chipendano at the end. And Chipendano came at the end because that was symbolic. Do you remember the Chipendano bit in the end? Do you remember the music at all? It's a jig. Except in Africa, it isn't a jig. But where I live, it is a jig. And when I said jig, Theo and Paul said, yup. And if you know anything about Irish or Scottish music, you would say, oh, that's familiar, just another instrument. And I said, this is our handshake. That's where I'm from. That's where you're from. That's your instrument. That's our music. The finale has to be that. That's our coming together. So you don't have to hear it, you don't need to know it, but now that you do know it, it adds the special collaboration, gives it another layer of yum, 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 yum. So I just thought I would do that. And as I said before, so I'm not going to elaborate on that, but he got tired playing. He just got tired playing. And that's because you get tired playing. The amount of energy and effort that go into playing these bows is mad. And so he needed breaks. And as I think I said, I didn't want him playing during the breaks because he then becomes extraneous. And the piece is for him, with him, and about him. No one else will ever play this piece. It's his piece. And that takes me right out of that art music thing. Well, I don't care which violinist plays it. They can interpret it any way they like. Every sample is him. Why would anybody else play over his samples? Totally ridiculous. And so, guess what? Celebrity gets killed again because nobody else can play it. But I know that every performance of that will have the integrity of the collaboration. And that's much more important to me than lots of performances. So that's the time to breathe in the stories. But so going about this, I narrowed it down fairly quickly to the 5 bows. Didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know when it was going to happen. And just like the radio pieces, because I've explained them to you already, I had to study and listen and listen and listen to all of these recordings. And it occurred to me that a lot of the magic that you heard in the Chinese piece was not going to be possible with a musical bow. I couldn't freeze it in space, but I could multi-layer it. So all the syncopations became a different player. And some of them sounded really organic, and some of them sounded, ooh, what's going on? And sometimes you didn't know where the bow was going to come next, so your spatial awareness was following the dance of where the bows were. And then there were all these little extras that I threw in, so he'd have vocal things that I would only throw in one loudspeaker. And of course, once he got used to the piece, he threw it a lot himself. And you know, that value added is what makes a master musician, of adding that little extra to make the piece dynamic in time. And so I use my knowledge of African improvisation in traditional music to allow him to do it on the spot. And working with him was amazing because we didn't have that much time to rehearse, to be fair. And every time he played it, it got better and better and much better. And the best was what you heard. The best was what you heard. If he had a second show that night, it would have been even better. But that doesn't matter. I am so thrilled that we reached that point, at that moment, in this festival. And it's recorded, and we can all see it. So I started thinking about it, and this is where material, bottom up, meets structure, top down. And so I don't really like talking about the recipe of a piece, but maybe it's worth just walking through the sections. It started with the uhadi and some very basic patterns. There are 2, And when the second one comes in, he has to move from one to the other. And actually, now that we've done this, I don't think that is entirely successful. So self-criticism, because he stopped for 4 beats and then got into the other one. I thought he could morph it like a sound transformation, but no. And so, if I do it again, I may rethink that, because it's the very beginning of the piece. I also wanted the introduction to set a scene of this is technology and this is Bo and this is Dizu. So that's why that was there. So if it were a nice theater, he wouldn't have been standing there, but he would have walked on, literally. But we had to compromise. So we've got the Uhadi in the beginning, and he starts talking about it, and then he plays the Umhube, in which his voice appears for the first time, as it's inherent to the instrument. And the music is a little bit more sophisticated, if that's the right word. It's richer in a way. But of course, when he gets back to the Uhadi, it's richer even still. So there's a building up towards something. Also, for those not in the know, the fact that all these overtones and it sounds like extended vocal techniques, but he's just doing it by nature and so well. It's just astonishing. And when he's on top of all these voices coming around him, with the umhrube, and then you're told it's a woman's instrument, and he's keeping it alive, and and there should be a book, or maybe there shouldn't be a book written about it. That's a whole story of the cultural situation that we're in. And I can only do that because he needed to breathe, and he told me all these stories. So instead of weakening the piece, it enriched it, I think. I hope you agree. I mean, some of you have heard his stories before, so, I know that. But nonetheless, for those coming in, woof. And then we move to the lugube, which is this microscopic instrument, which is just electric in what it could do. And it just took us somewhere else. And I think rhythmically that may be the most sophisticated section, I'm not sure. And he got that one immediately, like he never had to change what he was doing. I mean, again, improvising, but just got that. And I thought, this is a time for a break. And he did, at one point when he was resting, when we recorded, he started singing. And I went, oh my God, because I didn't know his whole history. I didn't, but I do now. I didn't know his whole history. And then he was playing, undertones, subharmonics. And then he went into a kind of falsetto range. And the resonance, the roots into the earth when he goes into his lower range. I mean, we can talk about nature and music until the cows come home, but this guy is the embodiment of all of that. And I went, okay. So in the studio, I asked him to sing. In the studio, he asked for a prompt, so he had his headphones on. The recording of him singing that I put on the fixed version of the piece, you can hear the music leaking. He also sang a Miriam Makeba piece, but I didn't want to play with that, although she, when I was young, was it. But his singing, and having had this flow from Uhadi through Umhrube to Lugube, just hearing this man with his presence and his master musician status singing, whoa, total contrast, lower blood pressure, and sit up and listen to this man make magic with his voice. From there, we have to have a bit of humor because he's so funny, but we also have to keep the voice from now on. It can't go anymore. So we get the Uhadi back, and he sings with that, and I do something that really, I thought he was going to complain, actually, but he didn't. He just said, I can't believe you did that. I took samples from him singing before and from the other recording, and I mixed them all together. And that's something he never heard before. I can't stop. I'm playing all over the place, and then I'm playing different pieces at once. That's why I didn't mix the bows, because that would have been weird. But it just all fit together, because they all fit together. They were in the right key, and and okay, I didn't know what the words meant, so if he said, I love women, and this is very spiritual, I'm dead. But I didn't do that, fortunately. So that's that Uhadi section that starts bringing reprises into the piece. And then we hit the magical moment, which, like I said, when I heard that, I couldn't believe the sound, because it's unlike any other musical bow. But we got sound.
Yes.
Chizani. The technique is to scrap on the groove, you know, and then the only thing that one could do is to change a different song.
It sounds like a wind-up toy.
It's originally from the San people. The San were all over, and we just picked whatever instrument that they had. But it's only that the people now, they start to demand in this instrument as if it's theirs, whereas the San people who started them.
Personal story, wind-up toy. Where are we going? It multiplies itself, and then this happens. And these pitches. And then there's the bow. And then there's the dome. And we're in my world now, except he's playing.
I used to love Jimi Hendrix, man.
And that's the least expected line in the whole piece. And that's because I told him I went to Woodstock. So I had to put it in because we were shaking hands right there. And after that, I love Jimi Hendrix, like, what? And so, yeah, it just pulls you out and it moves you forward. And then we get the Chippendano as the finale, and I've explained that, and I find it very celebratory. It is a finale, but it really is kind of like, why don't we get up and dance? Oh, we're at a bloody concert, not allowed to do that. That's the feeling I have of that. And he's speaking, recorded throughout the piece, but it was absolutely necessary that he say something at the end, and I obviously did not prescribe that. When he did it the first time, he started speaking in closer and then translated a bit of that. And I went, wow, if he does that. But I knew he was never going to do the same thing twice. So I thought it was beautiful what he said last night, to be really honest. It was just cherry on the ice cream, as it were. So that is a storyboard turned into this, and then you get into the intricacies of what did I do in each section. There's no difference, people, between Rock's music that I did before, which is entirely different, wacky, and this, because that's sectional. The first one was an introduction. Then I got into lifting belly. Then Rock's music, once or twice she shows it all. This, that was rocking. And so I went to a quiet passage, but the third voice came in. Then I went into you couldn't speak faster than I was speaking. And then patriarchal poetry, which was memorized by a couple of you. That was pretty good. Yeah, so it's sectional. No section is hugely long. So, like contemporary music, I don't want anything to be too long. And I don't think Disu's piece is too long. I hope you agree. I don't think it could have gone on forever, but I wouldn't shrink it. I wouldn't shrink it because it wouldn't give the sections enough time to breathe. So there's contrast, there's build-up, there's celebration, there's all sorts of hidden agendas, like the love letters of Alban Berg and the woman he never got in one or two of his pieces, you know, okay, fine. But there's all of that, and then it gets into how I compose and how I spatialize, and that would be a really boring chat, so you're not going to get that. I'm not going to play the other example, which was in the reappearance of the Uhadi, because you heard the gynecology bit. But when he told that gynecology story, and I think Paul or Theo prompted it, because clearly that was in his story repertoire, and was by far the least expected thing he said over the recording section. After I decided his voice was in, the gynecology story had to be in. Because traditional music, part of life, not separate from life. Traditional music is not artisan, part of life. The musical bow, as a tool of gynecology, is an instrument as part of life. Now, you didn't have to know that, but that's what it's illustrating. As still, it can be part of life, whereas none of the music we do is, that I'm aware of, unless you can come up with a good example. So I like the story because it's shocking and weird and funny, and he tells it so beautifully, but it's bringing music as part of life into the piece, just like he wants to keep the tradition going. So I'm just explaining reasons why some of that stuff was used.